You are tuned in to another episode of the Human Advisor Podcast. I'm your host, Desarte Yarnway, Head of Community at Altruist, and I'm telling you, this is the episode that I've been waiting for. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my good friend, Miss Lazetta Braxton. Lazetta, how are you?
I'm well, sitting by you, Desarte.
Oh my gosh, don't make me blush on camera. First and foremost, the last time that you and I had the pleasure of sitting with each other, we were in Orlando, Florida. We were speaking at a conference way before the world kind of shut down. And I remember, seeing you speak. We sat on a panel together, we talked about diversity and inclusion, and you had your own breakout session at that panel. I think you were talking about the history of money within African-American communities. The one thing that I did not get from that engagement was just a little bit about you. So I wanted to start this conversation with just learning about Lazetta Braxton from the early beginnings.
From the early beginnings, it ties to my why. My parents, Melvin and Dorothy Rainey, were high school sweethearts. And so they married, graduated, had me all in the same year.
Oh, wow.
So they were teenage parents. And so I grew up with them. And I saw firsthand the struggles when it came to money. They were very clear about what they had and what they didn't have. Challenges with credit cards. So I wondered if our challenges, were they related to their decisions? Was it systematic issues? Wasn't sure, but it was very troubling for me. And being the oldest child, I'm actually realizing even more now, looking back, I felt like a burden, just because I felt like another expense, right? I didn't have language for it growing up, but now I kind of see of having that weight on the world, of making sure that they wouldn't have to struggle. And so this journey for understanding personal finance, so it took some twists and turns. But that my parents were my why, and also coming from a rural town.
Virginia, right?
South Hill, the metropolis. Absolutely. Yes, there were no Black bankers, accountants. I was just curious, and I've always had a business mind. I love math and numbers, so I'm like, I'm gonna figure this out, and my parents are gonna be good, and the generations of mine and those who come behind me, we're going to have a different story to tell.
And you're doing that, exactly. And I look up to you for doing that. Now, let's spend some time on your parents in the household, right? I think that there's something that we talk about within our community, within the Black community or even the African community, right? It's called the Black tax, right? Because as a first generation American like I am, or somebody that was maybe born into poverty, you have the responsibility, right, of looking and giving back to the people that gave you the opportunity just to be on earth.
Right.
Right? So with that being said, you mentioned feeling like a burden. Like, when did you start to be aware of this feeling of being like a burden? Because we grow up, and to some extent, our first, 5 to 10 years, it's this childlike euphoria, right? Everything's new, everything is fresh. But then you start to be aware. You start to think for yourself. You enter, preteens, adolescence. You begin to see how things are around you. So when did you begin to feel that burden? What was that like?
It's funny that you asked that question, because it was just because of my therapy this year that I realized why I suppressed all of that. It's like, you got to get it done. You got to contribute. You got to help raise the siblings. You got to help with the cousins that go down south.
Right.
During the summer, because, I live next to my grandparents as well. And so I felt loved. It wasn't as though my parents said what I had to do. I just assumed that responsibility younger. And so in high school, I worked 2 jobs, but I also played basketball. I was a cheerleader. I was in band. I was head of the Beta Club. So I had this unusual, I guess, capacity early on in life as well, too, that feeling responsible for parents and siblings, it was just what I did. I'm a doer.
Did you feel like you had to overachieve because of that, being the oldest? Because I know that for me, I lost my dad young, and I'm the only boy. So as you can imagine, and I'm the youngest. I'm the only one to bear the last name of my father, right?
Yeah.
And that carries its own responsibility. So I can imagine for you, especially now being more aware of it, that probably made you feel like you had to be a doer.
Yeah. So my dad worked in construction, but he was
Mhm.
always good with his hands and
Mhm.
very good at it. My mom worked in a factory, right? And so he was gone every
Mhm.
week. There were no jobs in South Hill. He had to go to the closest,
City. Mhm.
cities to work. So guess who? As the oldest,
Mhm.
right? My mom worked as well too. So it was for me as the oldest child with a parent who traveled a lot. It's like I just assumed some of that parental role.
Mhm. Especially because your parents were so young when they had you, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like children raising children in a sense. I couldn't imagine having a child at 18. I know a lot of people do it, and it's powerful to see when they do it well. And look how you turned out, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think the black tax happens in all different like forms, right?
Yes, and so the black tax. So let's kind of
Let's
you
unpeel
defined it,
that.
right? Yeah, is like you said, right? I brought you in this world,
Hmm. And I can take you
and
out.
I can take
No.
you out, right? Contribute your part,
Yeah.
right, as well too. And I am a first generation college graduate, master's level, majored in finance. So there's the assumption you're in money, so you
Hmm.
make money. My parents never asked for anything,
Hmm.
and I give that to them. They've never. It's just they go with the flow, and it's just my personality to
Yeah.
say that you're going to live a good life. So when I turned 30, that was their 30th wedding anniversary. What did
Hmm.
I do? A reaffirmation ceremony. They
Hmm.
had the full nines, limo, and the like because we were taught to honor our parents,
Absolutely.
right? And so that's how I was raised too. Honor your parents. And I'm grateful, right? Because I know that my family is my superpower.
Hmm.
Anything go down, my family, they coming in
They'll be
strong.
there. Yeah, they'll be there for you.
Yes. And my dad is one of 8. My mom is one of 6. And we never really wanted. We struggled, but I didn't feel poor. I felt rich in love and rich in what my parents and grandparents
Hmm.
were able to give me,
Yeah.
give my family. And it's not always monetarily. It's support. It's encouragement. It's showing up. It's being there. It's challenging you. Accountability,
Hmm.
and it just when your folks are proud, that makes you feel really good too.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you that because although we're not necessarily blessed, right, with like financial assets, there's no trust account in my name,
So
right? But there's a lot of lessons that you learn along the way. What were some of those lessons that you really learned from your mom and dad and the people around you, the community around you, along the way before you kind of entered finance?
I mentioned that my dad was a construction worker. My
Hmm.
parents are retired, so whew,
Hmm.
that why came true, which feels so great. And my mom, worked in the factory as a seamstress, and then later the factory closed, and she
Hmm.
had the opportunity through state grants to go back to school when she was in her early 30s to become a nurse. And both of them loved their craft and was extremely, extremely loyal
Hmm.
to their employers.
Hmm.
When I kind of questioned some of that loyalty,
Yeah.
but that's the baby boomers.
Hmm.
So that was a deep lesson for me is to do what you love,
Do what you love.
right? And the more they got exposed and educated through our conversations, and as I've just learned from them as well too about how to just be good people, truthful, honest, right? Don't back down from conflict.
Hmm.
There's a graceful way to handle things.
Hmm.
That's the EQ
Yeah.
that is still missing in the workplace,
In the workplace, in our
in our
communities, this is
communities.
in our society, that empathy and
Yes,
emotional intelligence that I feel like is a skill that needs to be taught
yes.
and talked about a lot more. Speaking of retirement, like my mom just retired, so congrats to you
Oh,
for helping
yeah.
your parents retire. And I feel
Yes.
like the boomers of that era were used to the cadence of work, right? Save,
Mhm.
die type of thing, right?
Yes.
And I think that we're changing that narrative in a way, and that we're working, saving, but putting emphasis on living.
Yes.
You know, and I see that happening a lot more with professionals like you, with some of the people that we're associated with through this financial services community, and a lot of the younger professionals that are coming up. Like, I don't just want to work and do this traditional linear path that we've been taught in finance, right?
My grandfather, my dad's father, died at 69. My husband's father died 2 years after retiring.
Mm.
And that was another thing that was very important to me for my dad. It's like, look, construction worker, he had fallen off a scaffold,
Mm-hmm.
you know. We got him through that work comp. And even last year, he retired last December of 2020, he had another workplace accident. Unfortunately, he did have some medical situations, but you know, he's managing that now and that's real. So what people are seeing of people either because of physical labor or even mental labor just done
Being exhausted.
emotionally, physically, where they really can't enjoy retirement and or they can't envision what their life would look like because their whole identity has been so tied to what they do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you're speaking to me because you know, my mom yesterday sent me a video series that she's been creating because she's been
Oh,
gardening.
oh,
So she's like showing me
nice.
how she's found this new identity for herself
Beautiful.
because she's found something that she enjoys, right? Plants are growing. Like,
Yeah.
it almost made me cry, right? But I agree with you 100%. I wanted to talk about how you found finance because I see you as such a multifaceted professional and person, somebody that is not only a great financial advisor, a mother, a wife, but influencer in a lot of the ways, right? Like, I want to know what Lazetta's doing so I can see if I can try to do some of that because something is working over there, right? But let's go back to the beginning of your career. How did you find finance?
I said stumble, and it's so true. My second passion is accounting.
Mm-hmm.
I just nerd out on numbers and business. So my first job was an auditor for Marriott. Oh, I got to stay in nice hotels. They merged with the Ritz Carlton. You
Oh,
had
there
the
you go.
families and family.
Safe to say
have those
that you were
perks.
living.
Yes. And then it went to corporate accounting. And then I entered financial services working for Eddie Brown Capital Management.
That's not even around anymore.
Yeah, it is.
Is
it is. Eddie founded his firm the same year that Ariel, John
Investments.
Rogers in 83.
1983.
Yep.
I love that story.
Yep. And so it's still thriving, still in Baltimore, Black owned. So it's just very encouraging to get into the industry from the asset management side of the house. So I got to deal with endowments because I love nonprofits, you know, as well in terms of some of the work, high net worth individuals. So it was a great entree. Knew the Browns very well because they were also members of our church. So it was intimate in terms of that mentorship relationship. From there, went to Wachovia Asset Management again, but a little bit more holistic in its view. And I say that kind of loosely, but you had the relationship managers dealing with estate planning, that type of thing. Decided to go back to school, get my MBA, did finance again, security analysis, still saying, okay, investments is great, but it's not everything. We're missing out some pieces. So I majored in finance and also did entrepreneurship. So I did entrepreneurship and came up with financial fountains.
There you go.
And concept, financial fountains, was geared towards churches to help with boards, endowment management, and then thinking about stewardship, right? Because you're always within the church saying, are you making the most of your resources? That includes your money as well, too. So that was the concept, the business plan. Still wondering, this personal finance, what is it? So after I graduated, got my MBA, we moved to Tennessee, and I worked for a firm that had relationships with certified financial planners.
There you go.
There we go. So this firm had seats, private equity seats, that they would allow CFPs, those who own firms, to actually, fill those seats up. And so I met Melissa Hamble through that relationship, and she took me under her wing. I'm like, you are who I it's me. And it was like the chimes, the sky just opened up.
Mhm.
And I'm like, finally, I have a name, I have
Yeah.
a title, I have certification that defines what I've been looking for.
Yeah. Can we touch on that a little bit? So financial fountains, right?
Yes.
That was your first thing in kind of running your own financial business. Am I
Yes,
correct?
that is
What
correct.
did you learn in that experience? Because I think that we talked about failure in one of the episodes, and advisors think that if they're not growing fast enough, or if they're not, their content isn't resonating immediately, they're failures. But what did you learn? I'm sure there's a lot of lessons you took
Oh,
from running that with a niche demographic that you were trying to get to. What did you learn from that?
Financial Fountains was founded to provide access to financial planning.
Mm-hmm.
Middle America, mass affluent, with my parents in mind.
Mm-hmm.
It was a market at the time that only a few people said intentionally that they were interested in serving, because how do you scale that?
Yeah.
What I also realized during the time where I launched 2008 Financial Fountains was that Nestwise
Mm-hmm.
was the largest firm at the time that was trying to have a foray,
Mm-hmm.
right, using technology, which was another issue because integration
Yeah.
wasn't smooth as it is now. So I, through my networks, I was very active in a lot of the trade associations, just said, I'm going to create this. And this didn't have a baseline template. It was
Mhm.
just, I kind of pulled in different aspects. The other thing that's very important to know is that at the time, financial planning was a relational geographic
Yep.
business.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant you had clients where you lived.
Where you lived.
And so as my husband was kind of, moving up the career ladder, that also meant for us moving as
Mhm.
well. So I launched in 2008, Tennessee, then we went to New York, got to get registered there. Then we went
Yeah.
to Illinois,
Mhm.
got registered there, right? And so I got to stop, start,
Mhm.
rebuild, get in the community, waiting for technology to catch up in
Catch up
ways
with you.
that it has now.
Mm-hmm.
And integration as well too, and also the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So what was happening as I would move, my clients would stay with me. And so we had phone calls until there was, the
Mhm.
ability to do some, virtual conferences and conference calls. And then I also did the virtual office,
Yep.
right, as well too. So meet people downtown.
You were
Pack
virtual
up.
before virtual was cool. I tell
Yes.
everybody, like, Lazetta put virtual advising on the map. But continue. I didn't mean to cut you
Oh,
off.
I appreciate that because it was hard as hell.
Mm-hmm. I bet.
It was really hard, right? Because this is your baby you're birthing. I didn't realize how much I was ahead of the time. Lower fees relative to the industry, really taking a lot of hits
Mm-hmm.
for this dream, this vision that you feel but you don't see.
Yeah. It's blind faith.
It is the blind.
I want to talk about the idea of access, right?
Yes.
We didn't get the memo. That's how I feel. Like, nobody was having these conversations with me. We didn't talk about it at the dinner table. My family filed for bankruptcy at one point. I think access has a lot to do with that. Why is providing access, as you mentioned, that was the basis for why you started your own practice? Why is that important to you?
Access includes exposure, right? Because you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And that's what it was for me. I'm like, something's not right, but I don't know what it is.
Mhm.
And that's why I went to predominantly white institutions. For me, it was a
Mhm.
job. I'm
Mhm.
like, this is where the money is. University of Virginia, all the senators' kids, doctors went there.
Mm-hmm.
Wake Forest, private, as well too. Just saying, I need to be in the know. I need
Mhm.
to be in the conversations, and just curious.
Mhm.
And I always showed up like I was supposed to be there,
Mhm.
even though I'm like this rural town girl from South Hill, Virginia,
Yeah.
with this accent
Mhm.
that I can't get rid of. But you couldn't tell me otherwise. I didn't deserve
Mhm.
what others had.
How did you move with that confidence, right? Because I think that a lot of people have this imposter syndrome, and they're trying to be something that they do not currently feel that they are, right? Like, I need to act a certain way. I know that I did it. You probably might have done it in the early stages of your career. How did you manage to harness that as you grew yourself and grew your practice?
The imposter syndrome is real because even now people are like, I see you on TV and you even said the one and only. Uh, for me, it's deeply spiritual.
Mm.
This feeling in me says you just got to keep pushing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense to give up X amount of salary. It doesn't make sense to do this. It doesn't make sense to do all this volunteerism. It doesn't make sense. There's a lot of scars.
Yeah.
But if you're called and you're assigned to do anything contrary, it's almost death.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of my mentors, we'll touch on your mentorship from the lady in Tennessee, but he would say, sometimes you got to do it scared.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. Oh, yes. I mean, absolutely. And I mentioned to you, being married for 24 years, the sacrifices, the time is our currency where just chomping at the bit, creating models, trying to pivot, trying to explain, to your spouse who has no idea of the financial services industry, what the career tracks are or not.
Sometimes we don't even know what the career tracks are.
We're still trying to figure it out now, too. And it's just like this illusion that there is just all this overflow of money. But yes, but not for us. Not for us.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I want to go back to the idea of mentorship because you have become somebody that people look up to, especially young women of color. Can you talk about that experience with that mentor and how that influenced you? And any advice for young women that are trying to get in the industry, what they could do to have similar success, or as I would like to tell anybody that I mentor, like better success that I've been able to find. Right. So let's start with that experience. How did that influence you?
So Melissa Hamill, white woman from Tennessee, but just a pure heart. She immediately said, you want to join me for on the conference planning committee team. I mean, anything that she could expose me to. She referred my first clients as well. She just poured into me out of her heart. She just did. And I appreciate that and want to pay it forward. I also have had the opportunity to, I mentioned Brown Capital, working for majority African-American Black firm, going to PWI, just the breadth and depth of diversity in its true sense, right? I've also experienced high degrees of, racism.
Yeah, talk about it.
Colorism. And so for me, I bring things to the humanity. So for women, particularly Black women, we are at the bottom of the totem pole, right? When you think about stats on wage gaps, head of households, movements that we don't get credit for, just the backbone. And I can say that there are stats out there that show that. With that strength also comes resilience. And what we're seeing now in these times is defying that role and sharing some of that wealth and expecting some of that wealth back to us as well, too.
That is so key. I think that I've seen the shift in people feeling like you, that they deserve to be in the room. They deserve to talk on a panel that's not just diversity and inclusion, right? They deserve to have a voice, right? But as an industry, I guess, what can we do to help promote that agenda? Because I don't know if it's always being promoted in the right way.
I chuckle. So last year I launched Lazetta Associates, and it's a DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I add the B to the firm because of the work that I have been doing with major firms and large RIA firms as well too. And getting to the core, I would say the core, and I keep going back to humanity, human capital, is that there is this element of fear of those who are in the majority saying, I can't even envision what it would look like to be in the minority. And I don't blame that fear, because if you don't see it, you can't be it, right? So we say that inverse is like, if we don't see people of color, we don't see women in the C-suite at the table, then the reverse is true too. So do you feel as though, and I'm saying this to my white male colleagues who are running billion-dollar firms, do you think you'll still have a seat? Let's deal with this. Let's deal with it. I also say for financial advisors that things are changing. it's happening, particularly with the racial diversity as well too. So I
Yeah.
use Harry and Meghan as an example, right? If your client is the monarchy who says, I'm not sure we're ready for interracial marriages and succession,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or are you dealing with the couple who says, well, we have to start on our own because we're not going to get an inheritance.
Yeah.
You got to deal with these issues. This is practical. This is real. And it's now.
It is
It's
now.
not later. Yeah. So I think these conversations are not being had because people are not doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
They're not working with not only coaches, but therapists.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's trauma here that is a part of our culture in this country.
Mm-hmm.
There are conversations that have not been had globally. You still see leadership that are making decisions where people are not in the room that are impacted by it.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes some courage. And there's too short of courage in our industry.
I agree with that 100%. There's ideologies that have been passed down for centuries. When you think about it, that's a lot of baggage to unpack, right? So for the advisor that is running a firm right now, right, and might be trying to fulfill a quota or has one lone Latina woman at their company, right? What advice do you have for that person to be a source of support for that individual who's trying to survive in this industry?
Yeah, so let me kind of take the spectrum because I say to firms, it doesn't mean that you have to go out and then all of a sudden say, now we want
Mm-hmm.
more people of color or want more women just because you feel like you're pressured to do so.
Yep.
Be true to who you are.
Mm-hmm.
If you're out in Idaho and there's just not a lot of people that represent the population you're interested in, then that's how it is. But how else can you expose your business, right, to these changing demographics?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to your clients who are doing charitable work, right, what kind of conversations are you having, exposing them to different ways to invest?
Mm-hmm.
And then not even just charity. What about ESG? So other opportunities for impact investing, right? There are many ways to get at shifting dollars and economics.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a way that lifts all boats,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then now with people not wanting to go back into the office, you can open yourself up to more talent. So if you're in Idaho, if that's all where you want your clients to be, fine. But guess what? People are moving, they're shifting. And so maybe being a little bit more forward thinking in your office structure as well. And then what colleges and schools do you have nearby where you can do internship programs in the like high school as well too. And then for those lone employees, and I just chuckle because it was oftentimes where I was
Mm-hmm.
only Black,
Mm-hmm.
and the only Black female as well too, is give money in ways or support for personal development in communities so that we can refill our cups
Yeah.
because they get very depleted because there's not a lot of interest in our cultures honestly,
There's a playbook right there. This is at least a start, right? I want to go back to you and your journey. So after Financial Fountains, what was
Yes.
next for you?
Financial fountains. So Bianca Dorsonville,
Mm-hmm.
we met through the Association of African American Financial Advisors, Quad A. The referral actually came through CFP board, and we met at a local meeting when I lived in the DMV area, DC, Virginia, Maryland area. And she was like, I want to meet Lazetta, and I'm going to hang on to her coattails, right? So I guess she had been following me, and we're 12, 14 years difference.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of hit it off. And so we started masterminding together. And for me, I don't like the word mentor
Mm-hmm.
because you can learn from
Anybody.
any age. And the
Mhm.
reverse, and it's just the hierarchy is like, really?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I haven't found the right word for it. But in essence, everybody has something to offer at any age.
Mm-hmm.
So we just continued to, mastermind together, work on, Quad A stuff together, different projects. She was head of FPA's Next Gen. And she kept saying, we should merge. We should merge. And I didn't have a concept
Mm-hmm.
of partnership. I can do bad all by myself.
Mhm.
That's what our culture's been
Yeah.
touched, particularly for Black women. And I didn't want to share my baggage, right, of still trying to get financial fountains where I wanted to be. So some of that imposter syndrome was still very much part of my core, even though I was pushing through trying to figure out what's what. And so finally I surrendered. She was thinking about maybe selling her business, doing something different. I'm like, no, we should do this together. And so we married up after courting for about 5 years.
There you go. Sometimes that's how it works, right?
Yes, and we laugh, but it is a covenant. Our partnership is really give and take, but we're so much stronger together. As soon as we started merging, we saw a difference in our numbers and our energy, our focus. I mean, we're running like a Fortune 100 company.
There you go. There you go. So for the advisor watching, right, that might be thinking about merging, right? What advice do you give them? Because I truly believe you can go fast alone, but sometimes you can go farther together. So
yes.
Talk about that process of like the pride behind being a single advisor, a solopreneur is deep for a lot of people. But sometimes joining forces allows you to grow and scale even bigger and faster than you would alone.
I really do think it's somewhat culturally, right? Because if you look at law firms, some of the historical professions that have been around for a long time, accounting, it's like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Even within those professions, you have sole proprietors, as well too. So I'm not saying it's either or. I just would like to see more partnerships happening in financial services with populations who are typically overlooked and overserved, because there is scale, there is power. It is just like and it's not for everyone. You're right, because there's some people like, I want a lifestyle practice, I'm good. I'm already married. I'm not getting married again with this business,
yeah.
right? Because that's real. You are integrating your life. You're tying up, commingling finances with a partner. So there has to be trust. There has to be a baseline for open communication and transparency and vulnerability and family extensions. They say when you marry a person, you marry their family.
You sure do.
And Rianka and I committed to say, we didn't want our sisterhood to be hampered in any way by our partnership, but actually it's been enhanced. Because we're not living in fear. If something else different pops off for her, pops off for me or whatever, we're like, we're going to deal with it.
Yeah.
Let's see, because for us, going back to spiritually, we felt assigned to one another, living into that blind faith.
Yeah.
Figuring out as we go along, based on real good intentions, good heart, and saying, hey, we're in to win it.
There you go.
In the way it looks like it for us.
Absolutely. And you define what winning looks like.
Yes.
I love that. I'm going to ask you this question. I asked Emily Bender this question when she sat with me in Venice. How can men support women in our industry?
There's been conversations, particularly when you're dealing with the gender piece, where women or men would say, when I deal with this situation, I'm thinking about it if it's my wife or my daughter, right? To try to make it real. It has to go a step further than that. I don't think there's enough listening. And I love immersion. And what I mean by that, there's so many women conferences and conferences that are related to certain populations. When guys come to the women conferences, they feel so out of place. And it's so funny, and I love it. Right? Until you're uncomfortable, you're not going to understand. You're not going to work through those emotions as well. And of course, at women's conferences, we show hospitality, or we may flex to say, ha. Yeah, you're coming to our turf, but we have our rights to do that as well, too. So I think, for men to be in the room,
get uncomfortable.
Get uncomfortable. Get uncomfortable.
That's good advice. I think we all can take that advice. My last question for you is, think about yourself 10, 15 years ago, right? When you were that young advisor, when you were hopping around, when you were trying to grow your self-confidence about what you deserve in this industry, what would you say to that advisor, right? That young advisor that is trying to be the best that she can be, both professionally and personally.
I have this way of taking on this responsibility that are like boulders, right? Making sure that my parents retire successfully, taking that on like as a middle schooler.
Yeah.
And then as I look back, it's like I took on the industry. Took on the industry. Because those who came before me did the same thing. And so I was just like, it's my responsibility to move it further along. So that's why, another reason why I went independent. It's like, what are you going to do? I'm going to say what I need to say on behalf of my people. And what are you going to do about it? You're not impacting my finances, right? And it needs to be heard and it needs to be said. Oftentimes it's probably very brash in your face. Some of that, stereotypical angry Black woman. But yes, I have anger.
Why are you angry? That's what we should be asking, right?
Yes.
Like
and if you don't know, then shame on you, right? And so now this anger is now transcending for me to peace, because now the industry has, and not to say it didn't have before, and people like you who are carrying on the mantle and doing the work, you have the burden of awareness, you industry. You cannot say that you don't know.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do about it? These are cycles that we're seeing and experiencing it, and things are changing. So I'm handing off. That burden of awareness is there. And now, since you waited, when you wait, there's a premium that you're going to have to pay.
And that's it. Lazetta, I love sitting down with you. I really appreciate you joining me today. I feel like we need a fireplace right here, because every time I'm sitting across from you, it's like I'm just learning so much from you, and I just sit and let you talk, and it's such a pleasure. Before I let you go, can you please tell the people where they can follow along with you on this journey of not only taking on the industry, but inspiring so many people to be their best selves?
So 2050 Wealth Partners, that is our financial planning firm that I co-owned with Bianca Dorsonville. Lazetta Associates, that's my DEIB consulting firm. My handle is at Lazetta Braxton on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn.
There you go. And thank you so much for watching another episode. If you did not leave here inspired to be a better person in this industry, you do not have a heart. If you want to follow up with everything that we have going on here at Altruist, be sure to subscribe on our network at altruist.com/grow, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm your host, Desarte Yarnway, and we'll see you here again next time.